Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining Ten2Two today for our business webinar on designing a role and perfecting a job description. As experts in flexible and part-time recruitment and consulting, we have a wealth of experience in this area, and we'd like to share some of it with you today. We will also follow up with a copy of the slides, so no need to be writing too much down. I'm Jane O'Gorman, Director of Ten2Two and your co-host for today, and I'll be keeping an eye out for any questions you have over the course of the session. You can pop these in the Q&A below. Now, we only have 30 minutes for the webinar, plus added time for questions. So without further ado, I would like to hand you over to my lovely colleague, our MD, Deborah O'Sullivan, to kickstart the session today. Thanks so much, Deborah.
Lovely. Thanks, Jane. And welcome, everyone. I'm really glad you could all join us today. As Jane said, we've only got half an hour, so I'm going to crack on, see how much material we can cover. Typical, my slides have stopped working. Here we go. So we're going to cover in this 30 minutes, we're going to look at role design. So we're going to look at the circumstances around when you might need to be designing a role, the options available to you, and then a little bit on flexible working, because it wouldn't be a 10-2 webinar without us talking about that. We're then going to move on to the job description itself. So what is its key purpose? What's the difference between a job description and a job ad? And what are the key elements that you should include? And then finally, we'll end with top tips and Q&A. Jane will no doubt ask questions as we go through the process too. So as she said, don't be afraid to put your hand up. So in our day-to-day lives, clients come to us often, they have a role that they want to fill because somebody's moved on, or sometimes they have a requirement for resourcing, but they don't quite know what it is. So I thought we'd start by just going over the conversations that we would have with a client at that point, very early on in the process. And hopefully this will give you a flavour of some of the questions you should be asking yourself when you get to this point. So an existing role. If you've got an existing role that you think you're going to fill, the first question, the first thing to look for is, do you have an existing job description? It's a really good place to start, even if things have changed considerably. Then when you've got that job description, if you haven't, it doesn't really matter, because this is your chance to throw it all up in the air. The questions to ask yourself is, has it been working? Has the job actually been doing what you think it was meant to do? Has anything changed? Has the business grown? Has the business shrunk? Has the team changed in terms of what skills are now available in the team? And how does that affect this particular job? It's a good question to look closely at why the person's leaving. So is there something that that person has raised that can be addressed with the new job? Have they moved because they want more money, or they think the job is worth more money? Which leads me on to my next thing, is your market value correct? So just because somebody leaves, actually, you should always take that as an opportunity to review the job description and the salary and make sure it's still fit for purpose. Is the role purpose the same? What you will find, I mean, particularly through the pandemic, people have come out the other side and their businesses look very, very different to how they looked when maybe somebody was put into a role 3 years ago. So it's a really good idea to look at the key purpose of the role, and is it the same? Are there better ways that the role could be set up? Just because somebody is currently full-time at a certain level, does it have to stay like that, or is this an opportunity for change? What budget do you have available? So you might look at the market value and go, okay, we need to pay a bit more, but actually, if you haven't got the budget, then that equally will change what that job will look like. Look at the split of responsibilities. You might find there's someone in your team who actually would like to take on some of the responsibilities of that role, and you've just never considered it before. So take a look at the responsibilities and think about whether they all belong within that role, or maybe there's more than one role, or you can split the responsibilities across the team. And this is a theme that will come up a lot throughout the presentation, future considerations. Every time you think about recruiting or bringing in new resource, think about the future, think about your succession planning. has this role got a path up and through the organisation? Does it impact other team members and their aspirations for their career? So that's the sort of conversation we would have if there was an existing role requirement presented to us. And there's similar things to think about if it's a new role, but a new role gives you a little bit more flexibility because actually the world is your oyster almost. So the additional questions we would ask here are, how has the role come about? Is it growth? Is it a new client? Is it because you've reorganized somewhere else and you've created this role? Is it because somebody's overloaded? So it's actually quite a neat set of responsibilities that you can create into a new role. Back to this purpose, what is its key purpose? So what is the one or two things that this job is going to be responsible for, and it's crucial for that job to deliver? Who will it support? So identify who are the key stakeholders in this process. If it's just one manager, then that's the person you'll be talking to about the role, but it could be many departments, it could be colleagues. So think about who the role will support, whether it's direct management perspective or just in terms of across the team. What level does it need to be? So this is one we often talk quite a lot about, because clients will come to us and say, I need to replace my FC, or I need an FC. And what you realize is actually through talking things through, perhaps they don't need an FC. Perhaps they did need an FC before they introduced all their new technology, but now they could do with a part-time FC and a full-time bookkeeper. And in that process, you get two happier people in their jobs, and you're not overpaying because you've got a senior person doing junior work. So what level is quite important. And there's other options within that discussion where if it's a new role or an existing role, things you should think through. So the pay, what pay does it need to be? What's the market value? What hours are going to work? So does it really need to be full-time? Does it need to be a permanent position? If it's a short-term need for something, perhaps a 6-month contract would work to fill your need. If you're really not sure about the role at all, then some of our clients go to temp contracts to try someone out, to try the role out, and then move it to a permanent position. And then location. More and more we're seeing candidates really wanting an element of working from home and not wanting to think of themselves in an office every day of the week. So location is really important. And if you've got flexibility there, you should bring it in. And again, future considerations. Think about how this new role will fit. If you're a small company and you're growing, perhaps this is a bookkeeper position, but you in 2 years' time want them to be your FC. So think about the skills you might need in a person, thinking about the future. Sorry,
if I can just add in here just a sec, with a couple of questions on what we've covered so far. So we've touched on budget on the existing role, but and again here, is it better to define the budget first or the role first?
Always the role, I would say. So you want to be sure that you have put your arms around what that role looks like, and then adjust it if you find your budget doesn't meet it. It's better to start that way than try and squish everything into a small budget and then realize you've overspec'd the job.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that's some of the common discussions you and I have, interestingly, around what the business actually needs. And we sometimes find that if actually the skills are needed and the budget level needs to match it, it's something else within that mix that needs to give. And that's where you've referenced that, particularly perhaps in terms of hours, but still being able to attract the right person to do the right role. The second one was around talking about the contract type. So in terms of whether it's a permanent or an interim, but should the job description be the same, whether it's a permanent role or a fixed contract role?
Again, the job description is likely to be the same because it's about the role purpose and what the role has to deliver on a daily basis. But what you would do is obviously change the contract type and the benefits associated with it. And you know, in the bigger scheme of things, in the recruitment process, once you're further down the line, it should be said you'll be restricting your talent pool if you go contract or temp, because obviously people in a permanent position aren't going to leave a permanent job for a contract or a temp assignment.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so you've asked yourself some of these difficult questions. So just to summarize the questions, these are the things that I would say you should go away and think about at your job design point. What does the ideal look like? So that's in terms of what the deliverables are and the person. What can you get for your budget? What will work best with the existing team? And how does my succession plan look? So those 2 points are sort of linked, but when I'm talking about the existing team, what you want to make sure is the role doesn't overlap and make somebody in your team feel like they're being stepped over. Equally, you don't want to leave a big gap between somebody's current responsibilities and this role. And then the succession plan is a much more future-looking thinking process. Have you thought outside the box? Do you really need full-time? Do you really need someone that senior? Could you allocate some tasks elsewhere? And is it pitched at the right level to attract the right candidates? So this is this whole thing about trying to match your budget, your requirements to attract candidates in the job who want to stay in the job. So just moving on to that thinking outside the box, I just wanted to touch quickly on flexible working. So obviously we are huge advocates of flexible working, but I just wanted to highlight some of the things that flexible working can do for you when you're at job design or recruitment stages. If you're a really small growing business, then flexible working, part-time working allows you to actually just start small and see how it goes. You can start on a few hours and increase them as the business grows. It allows you to control costs. Obviously, a full-time recruit is a really high fixed cost, whereas even just recruiting someone on, say, 4 days a week rather than 5, you save 20% of your FTE salary straight away. It allows you to afford talent. So some people think that their talent pool will be less. It's actually more. If you offer more flexibility, particularly some part-time hours or some hybrid working, your talent pool actually opens up. And particularly in the current market, we're seeing that, I mean, all over the place. Candidates are walking away from jobs if they haven't got the right level of flexibility offered to them. Which is the second point, the fourth point there, which is attract talent. That's exactly what we're seeing, is that talent is more attracted to flexible roles. You will, just by definition, if you have a flexible role, you'll increase the diversity of your talent pool and your team. You'll attract older people, more experienced people, and more females. And what we know, research proves time and time again, is that you improve retention if you're offering your candidates flexibility, and you have a much happier workforce. You see less sickness, you see more motivation, higher well-being. So the sorry, Jane.
Sorry, yeah, just a quick one before we move on slides, just so well we've got it in our minds. You mentioned on the previous slide about starting small. If, for example, a role requires, say, 15 hours a week, but it's a growing business and likely to need more time in the near future or in a couple of years, is it better to be transparent about that on the JD?
Yes. Wherever simple answer, wherever possible, you want the job description and indeed the job ad to explain what it is you're doing. And what you find is candidates are really open to that. I mean, particularly from our candidate base, you'll have people where 15 hours a week, for example, at the moment would suit them brilliantly. And in a year's time, 30 hours might also suit them brilliantly because their circumstances are changing as your business is growing. So you can see that working really well, but it's much better to be upfront about it so candidates know where they stand.
Yeah, I agree. And in actual fact, sometimes in conversations that we have, that may well be what people are looking for in terms of thinking that there could be that opportunity to grow and add more with the business. So yeah, agree. Yes.
Cool. Yeah, so I was just going to touch just quickly on the types of flexibility we see working really successfully, just to throw into your outside the box thinking. So The top three are the most common, I would say. So a part-time day, so that's working every day, so 5 days a week, but maybe 10 till 2 or 9 till 4, slightly reduced hours. Working from home, which of course we're all very familiar with now, but is very popular amongst candidates. And for those who haven't or who aren't working in the recruitment space at the moment, the candidate market's really tough. It's really tight with employers chasing candidates, so it's a candidate-driven market at the moment. So jobs where it's all office-based are proving much harder to fill than they were a couple of years ago. Part-time week, I would say this is our most popular format for more senior roles. So 3 full days, 4 full days a week. And then you can get part-time and part week. So somebody working 10 till 4, but 4 days a week. That's less common. And we do still see job shares. Again, often works very well at senior level with a day overlap in the middle. So that's just some input to help you think about your outside the box thinking. So before we move on to the job description, I just wanted to quickly cover some of the factors to think about in your job design. So whether it's an existing role or a new role, research has shown that these are the things that people want in a job. So if you want somebody to join you and stay with you, then these are the things that people are looking for. Now, obviously, if it's a very low level job, some of these things are much harder to achieve, but you should always aim for as much as you can of this list. So most of them are really obvious, but variety. So anybody who's got a bit of variety in their job is likely to be much more engaged. The opposite end of the spectrum also applies. If there's too much variety, that can be overwhelming. So you want to get somewhere in the middle. A level of responsibility. So somebody feels accountable for whatever it is they're delivering. And with that comes autonomy. If people feel they can actually own something and deliver it end to end, research shows their motivation is much, much higher than if they feel they're just on a treadmill with no particular task that they own from end to end, which is that task identity point. Participation in decision-making really helps people stay engaged in the business and their job. I know this isn't always possible for lower level jobs, but even at a lower level, any participation in decision-making is valued. So if you can, try and build that into the job on a regular basis. And I would hope that everybody on the webinar recognises the importance of recognition and support. So you want to make sure the person is line managed and mentored in as strong a way as possible. And you want to provide a safe and pleasant working environment. So whether that be if somebody's based from home, checking in on their setup, whether they're based in the office where you make sure that it's safe and a happy place to work. And then the final two things are the things that you want to think about in terms of the factors for the job, which is the personal traits you want this person to hold and demonstrate to fit in with the rest of your team and your company culture. And then your essentials versus desirables. So I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, but we do often see a job description filled with a long, long list of essentials. And what we would say is always think about, are they really essentials? Obviously, if you're looking for a qualified accountant, then they need to have an accountancy qualification. But if you use Xero software, perhaps, but they are trained on Sage, then that's a trainable skill. So always make sure your essentials are truly essentials and your desirables are things that you'd really like them to have, but could probably be trained. And that again opens your talent pool if you can think in that way. So that's a sort of job design, which I know is a lot of talk around questions, things for you to think about, but I think it helps you understand what it is you're really trying to get. So we'll move on to the job description itself. So why do we need a job description? So it's got 3 main purposes. The first is the role definition. So everything we've just talked about, what is this job going to deliver for you as the business? It will be the basis of your candidate attraction. So it won't be your job ad, but it will form the basis of your job ad. So it will be used for candidate attraction. And then the third point, which I think some people forget about, I think job descriptions are often written and filed, But actually they're a management and a candidate reference point. So it helps a candidate understand what is expected of them. It's really useful at appraisal times. And it's really useful for both the line manager and broader management to say, okay, do our job descriptions actually all together deliver what we want to deliver as business? So probably more important than perhaps you thought. Now, we often get asked what the difference is between a job description and a job ad. And I did a little table, and I'm sorry it's very busy, but we will be sending it out. But I thought it was worth just whizzing through. So the key differences are a job description is an internal document, and it identifies what the job holder should achieve on a daily basis. The job ad is an externally facing document, often much shorter, and it's all about why a qualified person should apply for the job. So I'll just whiz down. You can obviously read it for yourself, but the job description is going to be informative, comprehensive and detailed, and it's going to inform the job holder or the candidate. Whereas a job ad is very much externally focused, it's short and succinct, and hopefully entices the candidate to apply. So it'll be attention grabbing. It's a marketing tool, really. Your job description is a reference document, and it doesn't matter about SEO wording, whereas when you're writing a job ad, you want it to be worded for search engine optimization, so it gets picked up on lots of searches. On the job description, you would list your essentials and desirables, and you'd include them all. On a job ad, minimal essentials is what we would always recommend. What we know, we see it every day, but we also know from research, is that if you put a long, long list of essentials, then a woman in particular will only apply if they can literally tick 100% of them. And a man will apply if they can tick 60 to 70% of them. So you don't want to restrict your candidate pool by listing a great long list of essentials. Sorry, and then jargon. Yeah, you don't want jargon in your job ads. It puts people off, even if they work in your industry. You just want to keep jargon to a minimum. And then what we would say is in your job description, it's fine to put some internal jargon. You'll probably have some acronyms, some systems that you use, but still keep it as much as you can in layman's language. And then finally, the job description will be written in the third person. So the job holder is responsible for X, Y, and Z, and your job ad will be trying to draw the reader in. So you will use the word you a lot. As a successful candidate, you will be da, 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 da. And as we talked about earlier, you will review your job description regularly. The job ad is a very short-lived thing, but it should reflect the tone and culture of your organisation.
Can I just jump in with a quick question? Is a job description ever too long? Bearing in mind we've got that differentiation between our job ad and our job description.
I would say no. You know, the job description should be a really comprehensive, detailed document about what the expectations are of the job holder. And the only time I would say it can be too long is if you are literally throwing the kitchen sink at it. And if you are, it's probably not one person's job. So the actual level of output would, by definition, reduce the length of it.
Good, thank you.
Okay, so sorry, I've got another busy slide. So the key elements of job description, when you're actually writing up the document, what are the headings that you need? And there are 11. So I'm going to put this into a template that we can send out just so that you can see how it would look in reality. But I just thought I'd quickly touch on them here. So there's some really obvious ones, obviously a title. What I would say about the title is, again, on the job ad versus the job description versus job ad, you want to make sure that title is a good descriptor, a market descriptor when you go out to market. It's fine internally on your job description to have a title that is internally focused, but be aware not to necessarily transfer that directly to the job market. You want to specify where the role sits, so what department it belongs to and who it reports into. What are the key interactions? So who does the role, who are the key stakeholders that the role interacts with? And then point 4 is probably the chunkiest bit of the job description. So it's the key areas of responsibilities and the deliverables associated with that. And that's the thing that should change. When you're reviewing your job description, that's the area that should change regularly. If your business is developing and growing, you would expect that. So annual appraisal time is a good time to do that. Objectives, again, they should be reviewed regularly, but if you can include them, even at a top level, it's handy to put them in the job description. Again, if you can, scope for progression. Often we see that missed out because sometimes you just don't know. But even if it's something, say it's a marketing exec position, even if it specifies there is room to grow to become a marketing manager, it shows that there's a path. It shows you've done that succession planning thinking. Point 7, required education skills and experience. So that could be purely you want a degree educated person, but it could be experience, 5 years plus experience in XYZ. And then your soft skills and personality traits. So these are things like team player, uses initiative, that type of thing, good communicator, demonstrates leadership skills. And then the final points are the sort of the hard and fast things. So where will the role be based? Is there any travel involved? And if so, how much? What the remuneration and benefits are. So that could be your holiday, private medical, pension. And then a summary of your organisation's culture and identity. Sometimes that appears first on a job spec, doesn't really matter. It's a factual paragraph rather than a sales pitch about your organisation.
Can I just add a little comment? Just while we're on this slide. So thinking about number 7, the required education, skills and experience, mainly because, Deborah, you've already referred to our essentials and desirables, but particularly when thinking about a job description and thinking about the market and the needs of the business, it's worth thinking about the essential skills or the comparable skills and experience. So, for example, if an essential skill is, say, to have 0, rather than a comparable skill might be to have an understanding of an accounting software like 0, it's worth having an open mind as to whether that's a potential and being clear about that on the job description, rather than eliminating anyone at first stage.
Yes, absolutely, Jane.
Okay.
And again, I think once you've got your draft job description, it's worth reviewing it. And in fact, I think I say that in the next slide. But it is worth reviewing it to say, am I being too picky? Is this really what I need? So leading on to my next slide, our top tips. So avoid overusing jargon in your job description. Like we said, it's fine, but just not too much. Think outside the box as much as possible. Just always question yourself, do I really need this? Do I really need that? Future-proof as much as possible. So if you know the job is going to grow, as we talked about earlier, add into the job description that it could grow in the future to include X, Y, and Z. Budget at market rates. Get input. So that's from stakeholders is what I'm referring to there. So I think it's always good to get a draft from the person who's perhaps going to manage the person or from your HR team, but then discuss the job description with the key stakeholders. Not too many, because otherwise you'll end up with a massive job description, but I think it's useful to get input because sometimes there'll be a point that you perhaps haven't thought of and another person might. Be realistic and honest. Is the job really the job? Sometimes you do see job descriptions and the person doing the job says, actually, I know that's my job description, but that's nothing like what I do. So it's always worth checking that. Get some expert advice. So get a second opinion from someone like us or other recruiters or HR people you work with to double check before you go to the next stage of doing a job ad and a recruitment process. Make sure your job description is fit for purpose. And as I mentioned, review regularly. So that's the end of my input. So over to questions. You're muted, Jane.
I think it might be sensible to unmute then. We've covered quite a few of the questions as we've gone through the session. Just a couple of practicals. One question in terms of how soon do you show the full job description to potential candidates in terms of that journey, job ad first, but the full detailed job description, at what point would you share to ensure that that person is, one, capable and interested and on the tasks that are required?
Sure. I mean, there's no industry standard, but you do often see job descriptions available at the time of advertising. Personally, I think it's better to get your job ad really succinct with the key things to attract a broad audience. And then when you get to a shortlist, share at that point, assuming you're going to cover all of those things in the interview process. So I think there's a happy medium in the middle, because job descriptions can put people off because they're internally focused documents. So if somebody's not working for your company at the moment, and then you give them 3 pages of quite detailed information, I think it's better to have had an initial screening so that they're fully engaged, they really want to work for the company, and then you share the job description, because the job ad should cover all the key elements. It shouldn't, you shouldn't have anybody at that point who haven't got most ticks in the boxes. Okay, thank you. A couple of general questions really around, and I guess this is because we're seeing a different work environment now. We're in a much more hybrid working scenario. Many people are working from home and in the office, and thinking about the working culture. And it's, when it comes to the job ad, fair enough, but the job description, in terms of the culture of the business, should we mention, for example, this is a dog-friendly office? It sounds like an unusual question, but actually we've come across that, haven't we? Yeah, absolutely. And yes, I think, your job description is a place to add anything like that. And something as particular as that, I would also put in the job ad, because what we know from experience is not everybody likes dogs. And some people, it actually would motivate them to apply for a job if it's a dog-friendly environment. So definitely include it on both job description and job ad. Yeah, and interestingly, we had the reverse too, where we had a situation where a job was initially remote, transferred to the office, which was a very dog-friendly office, but the candidate was allergic. So you do have to be mindful of things like that, even though it's a small element, but it can actually make a difference to the person hired. So there's that as well. In terms of the job ad, clearly it has to be punchy. How important would graphics be in the job ad? That would depend what channels you're going to use. So if it's on your own website, then absolutely no worries about graphics. If you're using job boards or any automated platform, the most you tend to see is brand. You tend not to see graphics. Social media, you could include graphics as a post, but then that's more about your social media strategy rather than job attraction. Okay, great. I'm just looking through some of the other questions now. So we have one that's saying, if we're using a recruiter, I think they would normally create the job ad and share the JD. Should we be asking to see that ad to make sure the messaging is correct? Yes. I mean, I guess it depends. If the recruiter knows you well, then they'll probably have your language down off pat. They'll know how to write a job ad, both for SEO purposes and to attract the right candidates. So you don't want to go backwards and forwards too much, because that's after all what you're paying a recruiter for their expertise in knowing how to write a job ad. But certainly, if you want to see it, yes, absolutely. And if you feel like you've got some input, then yeah, definitely. And how often should we review job descriptions? I think a minimum annually would be so if you do quarterly reviews, it's worth pulling them out at a quarterly review. I know sort of most people at a minimum do annual appraisals, so that would be the minimum, I would say.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I can add something on that as well. And it's going back to something you mentioned earlier, Deborah, about thinking about the essentials and desirables for a role, because we are in an evolving market and things do change. Automation is now a big part of the workplace. And it may well be that things within a job description have significantly changed simply because of some of the automated processes within an organization. So I think that's another very valid reason when looking at job descriptions and thinking of whether it's an existing role that's been replaced or whether it's a new role, about those automated processes and whether that impacts the job description as well.
Well, and the other thing, just because I know everybody's very busy, you know, the benefit of keeping your job descriptions updated is when you do need to recruit for that position at some point, it's ready to go. You know, you've got, you know, it's right, and it's very easy to then write up a job ad from it. Whereas if it's ancient, that's a much bigger job. So there is an incentive.
Absolutely. Is it worth having two job descriptions in the sense of if a role can be split? We've talked about that earlier. So is it actually worth having one with the full job descriptions and two split?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that before. It's not that common, but actually, so an example I would give is if you're a sort of a small growing business and perhaps all of your business admin functions are under one roof at the moment. So you actually know that eventually you're going to need a finance manager and an HR manager, but actually in the interim, you'd quite like want someone to do both. And we've worked on roles like that before, where actually if a great finance person comes along, you recruit them on less hours and then search separately for an HR manager. But if someone comes along who can do both, and there are people who can, then you put it into one job description. So yes, if it's that easily split out, then yes.
Yeah, I think we've seen that too, and it's worth mentioning if a role has that, about where the priorities lie, because we might find within a job description that the key responsibilities in the finance area with some administrative, and it's making sure the weight is explained in some way, so as to get the right attraction in that in terms of the candidate base too.
Yeah.
Great. I think that's all we have for today. So thank you very much, Deborah. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this lunchtime, taking your time. As we say, we will be sharing a copy of the slides, and I think, will there be a template example as well, Deborah? So we will get those across to you. If you have any questions that you think about after the webinar today, please don't hesitate. There will be contact links for myself and for Deborah, or if you want to block some time in our video calendars for a chat, please don't hesitate to do so. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, happy job descriptions, and we look forward to another webinar coming soon.